Hello everyone and welcome back. The final piece that we need to implement to have user management up and running is the login screen that we have displayed here. So let's go over what should happen whenever a user gets logged in. The user must already exist on the server. The user is going to simply fill in its ID and password. It's going to hit login. An HTTP post is going to be done to the server to a new service that we are about to implement. And on that service, what we're going to do is we are going to take the password that was sent over the wire and we are going to apply this logic that we had here for verifying the password of the user. So we are going to compute the password digest at the level of the server, and we're going to compare it with the digest that we have already stored on the database. If the two digests match, it means that the password is correct, and so we can create a user session. Let's then start implementing the login functionality. We're going to start here at the screen in the front end at the level of the login button. So if this button is clicked, we are going to trigger this login method here at the level of the login component. Here, what we're going to do is we are going to call the authentication service and we are going to pass it the email and password to a new method that we are simply going to call login. This new method is then going to be returning an observable, so we need to subscribe to it, otherwise the login post request will not be triggered. And here, if the login is successful, we are just going to add some logging logic here. We are going to do a console.log and we are going to say that the user is correctly logged in. We are also going to apply the same logic that we have applied before. We are going to call the router and we are going to do a navigation simply to the home screen of the application. Let's then implement the login method. We are going to go to the authentication service, and this is going to be very similar to the sign up method. Actually, we will be changing only a few things in this post request. So the name of the method is login. We are going to do an HTTP post. We are going to be calling here a different URL /API/login, but we still have to pass the email and the password. And we are also getting back from this service the user. So with this in place, if we go back here to this login component, we are going to see that we get here a compilation error. So we are missing here the arrow sign. And with this, we have our compilation errors fixed and the client part of the login functionality is now implemented. Now let's see how would we do this on the server side. We're going to go here to the server directory and we are going to create a login route file. In this new file, we are going to paste in the skeleton of an express route handler. We are going to be calling the route handler login. And before going any further, let's plug it in here to the server API definition. Let's simply copy paste here the logout definition. And we are going to be using here, it's also an HTTP post. We are going to be calling this new login handler instead. So with this in place, in order to implement the login functionality, the first thing that we need is to retrieve the credentials from the HTTP request. So we are going to access the request and we are going to take this from a JSON object which is available via the request body. The credentials contain the user email and the password, so the first thing that we need to do is to see if the user exists in our user database. So we are going to go to our in-memory database and we are going to call this method that we have defined here, find user by email. We're going to pass it in the email of the user. Let's import here the database from the database file. Let's quickly have a look at the find user by email method. So it's simply doing a query to the in-memory database as expected. So this means that at this point we have here the user. Now there are two cases. If the user does not exist, then we can immediately send back to the browser the information that the login was not successful. But we should not give a potential attacker too much information about what went wrong. So like the case of the loading of the lessons that was not successful, what we're going to do is we are going to send simply the HTTP status code 403 forbidden. So we are not making the difference if it's authorized, not authorized. Any security error will always return 403. This is so that the attacker doesn't try multiple emails and then it sees this email exists, so now I'm going to switch from guessing the email to guessing the password. This way the attacker really has no information about what went wrong. Was it the email that did not exist? Was it the password that was incorrect? So we send back 403 forbidden, and if the user does exist, if the email exists in our database, then we are going to try to attempt to log in the user. We're going to call here a function that we are about to define, attempt login, and this function we are going to be defining it here as an asynchronous function. This function is going to then return a promise, and it's going to take as input the credentials and the database user. And notice that we are not passing in here the response. What we're going to do here is we are going to wait for the successful evaluation of this promise, meaning that if the login occurred successfully, then we are going to build the response here and we are going to set the cookie values. So we are going to define here a promise handler for that. On the other hand, if there was an error, we are going to catch it. This will mean that the login failed. So if the login has failed, we are going to send back a response that is going to simply contain a status code. We're going to send, like before, the status 403. This is simply not to give the attacker any information about what went wrong. Was it the user email that was incorrect or the password was not correct? The attacker will not have that information. Now that we have the skeleton of the backend implementation in place, let's implement the login functionality. We're going to validate the email and the password, and we're going to learn about error handling with TypeScript async await.